The wind had died suddenly, leaving the forest in a tense, expectant silence. Leaves hung motionless on skeletal branches, and the trail ahead curved into shadows that seemed too thick, too dark. Marcus paused, the crunch of his boots on the dirt echoing like gunshots in the stillness. Somewhere ahead, water trickled, though he couldn't see the stream. A faint metallic tang clung to the air, sharp against the earthy scent of pine and wet soil. Then he heard it, a whisper impossibly close yet coming from everywhere. "Don't follow." His heart thumped. He spun, scanning the fog tree-line. Nothing, just mist curling around the trunks, bending as if the trees themselves were breathing. He swallowed, trying to convince himself it was wind, imagination, the kind of fear that comes from walking alone too long. A backpack lay across the path, torn and frayed, its owner nowhere in sight. Marcus stepped closer. The straps were smeared with dirt, or was it something darker? His stomach clenched, and he forced himself to glance around, but the forest had changed. The trees, which moments ago had guided the trail, now pressed inward, a living wall of green and shadow. And then, from the fog ahead, a figure emerged. Not running, not walking, just standing. It raised a hand slowly, unervingly human, and whispered again, "You should not be here." Marcus froze. The hairs on his neck stood on end. Something in the woods had noticed him, and now it was waiting. Marcus's hands trembled as he stuffed the torn backpack into his own pack. His mind screamed at him to turn back, but the trail behind had already vanished into a low-hanging mist that clung to the earth like a living thing. Every instinct he had told him to leave, yet something, call it curiosity, or the stubborn pride that had brought him here, pushed him forward. The forest had a voice, though it was subtle. Twigs snapped underfoot in patterns that seemed deliberate. The wind whispered with strange intonations, and far above, branches groaned as if stretched by invisible hands. He tried to focus on ordinary things, the sun struggling to pierce the canopy, the scent of pine and damp earth, the occasional rustle of wildlife. But nothing felt ordinary anymore. Marcus recalled the stories he'd read before setting out. Hikers disappearing on these very trails, some returning days later changed, hollow-eyed and muttering incomprehensible words. He had dismissed them as exaggerations, until now. The silence pressed against him like a living weight, and each step forward made the mist seem denser, heavier, almost suffocating. He paused beside a jagged rock, catching his reflection in a small puddle. His face looked pale, stranger than usual, eyes wide and darting. Behind him, the forest remained still, yet he could feel eyes, dozens of them, tracking his every movement. He shook his head, forcing rational thought. It was just nerves, overthinking, the remnants of too many late-night horror stories. Then he heard it. Laughter. Soft at first, distant, as though carried on the wind. Then sharper, closer, yet with no discernible source. It wasn't a laugh of joy. It had an edge cruel and knowing, cutting into his chest with icy fingers. Marcus froze. The hairs on his arms rose, goosebumps pricking his skin like tiny alarms. A sudden movement caught his eye. Across the trail, a shadow shifted, human-shaped but wrong. Too tall, too angular, gliding rather than walking. He blinked and it vanished. He felt the hair at the back of his neck tighten into a hard knot. This was no ordinary forest. This was something else, something patient, waiting. Marcus's phone buzzed in his pocket. Relief flared briefly. A message from his sister. "Have you reached the ridge yet?" He typed back quickly, hand shaking. "Almost there. Weird fog, odd sounds. Nothing serious." He hit send, but a creeping doubt gnawed at him. What if this trail didn't lead where it should? What if he was already off course, lost inside a place that had its own rules, its own time? He continued. Each step felt heavier. The path seemed to stretch endlessly, twisting back on itself. Rocks appeared where there should have been dirt. A fallen tree now blocked the trail he'd passed just minutes ago. He stopped, breathing hard, trying to listen for the normal sounds of the forest. Birds, insects, wind through leaves. There was nothing. Just the subtle hum of silence, punctuated by the occasional whisper that seemed almost articulate. "You shouldn't be here." The voice was unmistakably human this time. He spun around. Empty trail. Mist curling between the trunks. His rational mind grasped for explanations. Wind through the hollowed trunks, echoes of his own movements. Yet a part of him knew. The feeling in his chest, the tight sinking dread, wasn't imagination. Something was out there watching, waiting. Marcus moved cautiously, stepping over roots that looked like twisted veins, through patches of moss that seemed to breathe under his weight. The trail bent sharply, revealing a small clearing. In its center stood a campsite, long abandoned. A kettle blackened with age rested atop a stone fire pit, smoke stains still faintly visible. The tent was collapsed, torn by time or some unknown force. Items lay scattered, a journal, a pair of boots, a water bottle still half full. None of them were his. He approached the journal cautiously. The pages were brittle, yellowed. Scribbled words in frantic, looping handwriting caught his eye. Do not follow the sound. It watches. It waits. It remembers. A shiver ran down his spine. He glanced around. Mist was rising faster now, curling like living fingers around the trees. The air had grown colder. A faint smell, burnt hair, something metallic, filled his nostrils. He thought he saw a figure at the edge of the clearing, watching. Just a glimpse. Thin, hunched, featureless in the fog. Marcus swallowed hard, trying to steady his breathing. He had to keep moving. Logic insisted he turn back, retrace his steps. But the trail behind him no longer looked familiar. The forest had shifted. The opening he had walked through moments ago now appeared as a dense wall of shadow. Panic rose like bile in his throat. Suddenly, a voice, closer now, echoed from all directions. Don't leave yet. He spun. Nothing. Just the fog, thick and suffocating. And then he noticed the trail markings. Symbols carved into trees, twisted shapes he didn't recognize, dripping faintly with something dark. His stomach clenched. These were not ordinary hiker's marks. These were warnings. Or threats. Marcus's hands shook as he gripped his backpack straps. The journal in his hand felt impossibly heavy, almost pulsing as if it contained a heartbeat of its own. The forest loomed around him, alive and patient. Something was guiding him or hurting him, deeper into the unknown. And for the first time, he realized with stark clarity, he might not leave this place the same. The fog thickened. Shadows lengthened. The forest whispered, laughed, and breathed. Marcus stepped forward, and the trail seemed to open willingly, beckoning him into its depths. Marcus didn't know how long he walked. Time had stopped, or maybe it had always been like this, a trick of the forest, bending and folding around him. Every turn of the trail seemed familiar yet wrong. A boulder he remembered stepping past now loomed where it shouldn't. The mist clung to his clothes, wet and suffocating, as if the forest itself were breathing onto him. He tried to recall the stories he had read before the hike, the local legends whispered by campers and rangers alike, but the details blurred. One tale spoke of hikers disappearing for days, then returning hollow-eyed, speaking nonsense about the watchers and folded paths. Another mentioned journals found abandoned in campsites, pages smeared with strange stains and frantic scrawls. Warnings, pleas, confessions. Marcus had laughed at them in the hostel the night before. Now, laughter felt impossible. He paused at a bend where the trail forked, unsure which way to go. Both paths seemed identical, both shrouded in a mist that muffled sound and warped perception. His eyes caught movement, something darting behind the trees, almost human in shape but impossibly thin. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to breathe evenly. You're not supposed to be here, a voice rasped from the fog. Marcus spun. Empty trees. Nothing. The forest was silent again, save for his own heartbeat, hammering in his ears. He forced himself forward, gripping his backpack straps as if they could anchor him to reality. Hours, or maybe minutes later, he found the remains of another campsite. Broken tents, scattered gear, scorched stones from a fire long gone cold. A half-empty water bottle sat on a log, dusted with ash. He approached cautiously, every sense screaming that he was being watched. He picked up a journal from the ground. Its pages were brittle, yellowed, edges curling. The handwriting was frantic, jagged. It waits. Always. We thought it would leave if we ran. It doesn't. Don't listen to the whispers. Don't answer them. They know your name. They remember. A shiver ran down Marcus's spine. The hairs on the back of his neck rose. That last sentence repeated in his head like a drumbeat. They remember. They remember. As he read, a branch cracked behind him. He spun, heart pounding. Nothing. Then he heard soft laughter, as if dozens of voices were just beyond the fog, watching, amused. The sound didn't move, didn't change. It just existed, mocking him. Marcus's mind drifted to stories he had heard before, bits of local lore pieced together from old newspapers and whispered warnings. Decades ago, a hiker named Eli Warren disappeared in these very woods. Search teams found only a journal filled with bizarre sketches. Winding trails that didn't match any map, symbols carved into trees, and notes describing shadows that follow the living like memory. Warren's friend swore he returned changed weeks later, muttering names that weren't human, staring at corners of rooms where nothing existed. Another tale spoke of a couple hiking a century-old trail. They returned months later. One had a voice that no longer matched their lips. The other's eyes reflected landscapes he had never seen. Even the rangers had rumors, though they denied them officially. Hikers vanish, sometimes for days, sometimes forever. When they return, they are different. Something about the forest takes them, or alters them, while leaving their bodies behind. Marcus shivered as he remembered these accounts. Each story mirrored the subtle disturbances he had noticed on the trail. Shadows out of place, whispers in the mist, the sensation of being observed. The forest revealed itself in small, deliberate ways. Every step Marcus took seemed monitored. Tiny disturbances around him, the subtle rustle of leaves, the movement of shadows, grew increasingly sinister. A boot, identical to the one he had seen near the first campsite, appeared several yards ahead, angled as if someone had stood there moments before. No footprints surrounded it. A water bottle rolled slowly toward him, then stopped abruptly. No wind. No hands. Just stopped. Whispers called his name from multiple directions, each one slightly delayed, echoing off invisible walls. He tried speaking aloud to assert control, but his words felt swallowed by the fog. Hello? Who's there? Nothing but silence. Then the laughter again, soft, cruel, and inhuman. Marcus began to question his own perception. The trail no longer obeyed logic. Branches he had passed disappeared. Landmarks shifted. Time warped. Sometimes the sun would peek through the canopy for a moment, then vanish instantly, as though the sky itself was unsure. He felt eyes on him constantly. Every movement, every breath observed. The feeling was suffocating. Even the forest floor seemed aware of him. Leaves subtly rearranged, roots bending in unnatural angles, stones shifting beneath his feet. At one point, he thought he glimpsed a figure crouching behind a tree. Its face was pale, eyes black, staring directly at him. When he blinked, it was gone. The trees stood as they had before, innocent and still. But Marcus knew better. A sudden whisper made him jump. Don't look back. Along the way, Marcus stumbled upon signs of other hikers. Some alive, some not. He encountered brief, chilling interactions. A man muttering to himself near a stream. It's watching. I can't leave it. A woman staring at him, eyes wide and unblinking. Don't go there. Never go there. These encounters lasted only moments, disappearing into mist as quickly as they appeared. Their warnings left a cold residue on his mind. The trail itself seemed alive. Paths twisted back on themselves. Familiar rocks and trees were replaced by strangers. The fog thickened, curling around him like fingers. Each time he tried to retrace his steps, he ended up in unfamiliar ground. Marcus's thoughts became fractured. He questioned whether he had been here before. Was the forest playing tricks, or was his mind unraveling? The air smelled faintly of decay and iron, sharp and lingering. He realized the forest was not just a setting. It was a predator, patient, intelligent, and cruel. Every step he took seemed guided, manipulated. He could hear whispers, faint at first, then louder, repeating his name, mocking him. Marcus. 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 He wanted to run but couldn't tell which way was safe. The trail wasn't just a path anymore. It was a labyrinth, alive, shifting, hungry, sleep-deprived, soaked by mist, and surrounded by impossible sounds. Marcus's mind began to fracture. He glimpsed people, friends, strangers, in the fog, only to have them vanish when he blinked. Voices imitated those of loved ones, whispering pleas he couldn't trust. "Marcus, come here. It's okay. Don't be afraid." Yet instinct screamed danger. Something about the tones, the subtle dissonance, told him that following was fatal. The forest seemed to mock his reason, turning every hope of escape into fear. Every path that appeared correct led deeper into the mist. Every sound that promised human company ended in silence or screams. At the heart of a clearing, Marcus found a circle of stones, each etched with symbols he did not recognize. In the center lay a figure, curled on the ground, shaking. As he approached, the figure looked up, pale, wide-eyed, unblinking. They're everywhere. Before he could respond, the figure's head snapped toward the mist. Marcus followed the gaze and saw them. Shadows moving against the natural light, gliding between trees, humanoid but distorted. They paused when they noticed him, forming an almost ritualistic pattern around the clearing. The figure screamed, a sound hollowed out of fear, terror, and something far older. The scream echoed, multiplied, bouncing off invisible walls, until Marcus felt it reverberate inside his chest. He stumbled back, the journal in his pack rattling as if alive. He realized with stark horror. The forest was awake. It knew him. And it had been waiting. By now, Marcus is fully isolated, paranoia fully set in, and the forest's unnatural rules are clear. The longer he stays, the less certain reality becomes. The whispers, shadows, and impossible paths have shown that this is no ordinary hike. He is being psychologically hunted, and escape may be impossible. The stage is set for the climax, where Marcus will confront these forces directly, and the forest will close in completely. The mist had thickened into a shroud, pressing against Marcus like a living thing. Every tree seemed taller, sharper, the shadows between them darker and more deliberate. He could no longer tell where the trail began or ended. The forest was no longer a path but a labyrinth, and he had already lost the measure of time. Hours, days, minutes. The sun, or what he thought was the sun, had vanished behind a wall of gray. He stumbled into a clearing he didn't recognize, a circle of stones partially buried in moss. Symbols, carved deep into the rocks, glimmered faintly in the fog. Marcus's heart sank. He had seen them before, in journals, on trees, in fleeting visions, the marks of the forest's claim. His hands shook as he stepped closer. Then he saw them. Figures, at first just shadows, emerged from the fog, humanoid in shape but grotesquely elongated, gliding without bending knees. Their eyes, if they had eyes, were blank, absorbing light rather than reflecting it. Marcus froze. The forest had formed a perimeter, closing around him with an inevitability that left no space for retreat. A voice slithered through the fog, echoing and impossible to locate. "You came alone. You are ready." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat dry. He turned, searching for a way out, but the mist shifted, forming new paths, erasing others. The air smelled of wet earth and decay, metallic and acrid. It was thick with anticipation, and he felt its gaze penetrate him, stripping away courage with a touch he could not see. A shadow detached itself from the rest, moving toward him in slow, deliberate steps. Marcus raised his hands, trembling. I don't know what you want. Just let me go." The shadow stopped a few feet away. A voice, chillingly human yet warped, whispered, "You shouldn't have come." It didn't advance but radiated a presence, a pressure on his mind. Marcus stumbled back, tripping over roots that seemed to writhe underfoot. He fell onto the damp ground, heart hammering, ears ringing. All around him, whispers began, faint at first, then overlapping into a chorus. Names, not his own, screamed and hissed in the fog. He could almost see the previous hikers, ghosts or echoes, twisting in impossible contortions, mouths opening without sound. Their eyes, vacant, accusing, hungry, followed his every movement. "Run," one voice urged. Stay. Another countered. The contradiction tore at his mind. Paranoia became clarity. He was surrounded, watched, and trapped. There was nowhere left to go. Marcus scrambled to his feet, forcing himself toward what he thought was the edge of the clearing. Every step brought disorientation. The ground undulated unnaturally, trees shifted subtly, rearranging themselves. A familiar path appeared, then vanished as soon as he approached it. He caught sight of a figure, a hiker from one of the journals, pale and shaking, standing just beyond the mist. Their eyes met, and Marcus felt a flood of despair. It doesn't want you to leave," the figure whispered, voice broken and warped. Before Marcus could respond, the figure dissolved into the fog, leaving nothing but the echo of terror. The forest seemed to pulse, alive, mocking, aware. Branches moved like limbs, the mist curling around him like smoke from some ancient sentient fire. He ran, though he didn't know where. The whispers followed, now forming words in unison. "We remember. We remember. We remember." His mind fractured. Was this real? A hallucination? Or the forest itself speaking? Every shadow was a threat, every sound a warning. He stumbled into a small glade, and the ground beneath him seemed to shift, sinking and rising as if breathing. Marcus sank to his knees, clutching his head. The whispers escalated into screams, overlapping, layering, some familiar voices among them. Friends, family, even his own. "Marcus, come back. You can't leave. It's already inside you." His thoughts scattered. Faces appeared in the fog, twisted reflections of the missing hikers. Eyes empty, mouths opening in silent screams. Shadows pressed closer, their forms impossible, gliding without touching the ground. He remembered the journals, the warnings, the legends, and he realized the truth. Those who returned never returned the same. The forest changed them, or extracted a part of them, something fundamental and irretrievable. I won't. I won't," he whispered to himself, though the words felt meaningless against the oppressive consciousness around him. A sudden silence fell. The whispers stopped, leaving a vacuum of sound. Marcus looked around. The shadows had coalesced, forming a single towering entity, humanoid but impossibly tall, eyes glowing faintly in the fog. Its presence was overwhelming, suffocating, like standing beneath a crushing weight of inevitability. "You belong to us now," it said, voice both everywhere and nowhere. Marcus's hands shook as he tried to run. Doors of perception, if such things still existed, collapsed. The forest around him bent, folding inward, paths twisting impossibly. Every instinct screamed that resistance was futile. He stumbled into a shallow depression, mud sucking at his boots. The entity approached. Its face, or what might have been a face, distorted in impossible ways, morphing, stretching, features appearing and vanishing with a cruel rhythm. Marcus fell backward, hitting the ground, and for the first time truly understood the legends. There was no escaping this forest, no outsmarting it. Marcus screamed, clutching at the fog. "Stop, please. I didn't mean to," the entity whispered as though tasting his fear. "Fear is only the beginning." From somewhere, faint, overlapping voices. "You will change." The forest seemed to breathe with him, pulses of wind and mist pressing against his skin. He tried to shield himself, but nothing mattered. The entity moved closer, and reality itself warped around him. His hand seemed to pass through the mist, the earth beneath his fingers softening, dissolving. He cried, "I'm human. I'm still me." One final, hollow whisper answered. Not for long. Marcus's mind splintered. The forest forced visions upon him. Missing hikers wandering endlessly, voices calling, pleading, screaming. Time fractured, days compressed into moments, footsteps echoed impossibly, and shadows became living entities that mocked and mirrored his movements. Every step forward brought despair. Every glance behind revealed impossible horrors. Friends, strangers, and distorted reflections of himself staring back. Panic became resignation. Fear became inevitability. The whispers formed a chant. We remember. We take. We change. His body felt light, unreal, as though the forest was consuming him from the inside out. His voice faltered, thoughts scattered into fragments. "No, not me, please." And then silence. When Marcus's eyes opened, or when the forest allowed him to perceive again, he was no longer certain of his own reflection. His hands looked pale, too long, fingers curling unnaturally. The mist had thinned, revealing the clearing, but nothing was normal. Trees bent impossibly, shadows clung to him. He was still himself, but something essential had shifted. He was other. The journals, the whispers, the shadows, they had marked him. Something inside him was changed, and he could feel it, pulsing, alive, always aware. He tried to speak, but the words sounded alien, echoed in ways that weren't his own. "Marcus." A distant voice called. He recognized it, though only barely. He realized, with absolute clarity, that he would never leave this forest the same. And worse, he understood that it didn't matter if he survived physically. The forest had already claimed him in ways that mattered most. The entity receded into the fog, leaving Marcus in a clearing that seemed unchanged yet entirely wrong. The whispers had stopped, but the forest still watched. The path he thought he had followed was gone. Every step he might take now would be dictated by the forest's will, the shadow's hunger, the inevitability of the change. He was alive, but altered. Hollowed, fractured, and aware of the true horror. Some forces cannot be fought. Some forests do not just hide danger. They consume the very soul of those who enter. Marcus took a hesitant step forward, the fog curling around him like fingers. The forest breathed. The shadows waited. And the whispers would always remember him. The fog had lifted, or perhaps it had simply become thinner, thinner enough for Marcus to convince himself that the forest had returned to normal. The trees no longer pressed against him, the shadows seemed less deliberate, and the whispers were gone. Yet every step he took carried the weight of inevitability. He was no longer the man who had entered the forest. Something essential had been stripped from him, replaced with a cold awareness that this place did not forgive, did not forget, and certainly did not release. The trail that once felt endless now seemed to open before him, curving back toward familiar territory. Sunlight filtered through the canopy in uneven shafts, illuminating patches of the forest floor like frozen moments in time. Marcus's chest tightened as he realized he had survived, but survival felt hollow. His hands, when he glanced down, seemed slightly elongated, pale, the skin drawn tight over knuckles that now seemed sharper. He flexed his fingers, unnerved by the unnatural stiffness, the subtle twitch of muscles that were not entirely his own. Every instinct screamed that he should call out, seek another human, reach for help, but the sound of his own voice seemed alien. When he tried to speak aloud, the words came in fragments, echoing unnaturally through the trees. I am alive." It sounded wrong. Wrong even to him, yet there was nothing else to do. He pressed on, following the trail that twisted like a memory rather than a path. At every step, his eyes darted to the shadows, half expecting them to move, to reach for him, to remind him that the forest had not released him completely. And perhaps it hadn't. Perhaps it never would. Signs of change. The farther he walked, the more he noticed subtle changes in himself. Reflexes felt heightened, perception sharper, yet distorted. Sounds carried differently. Distant movement drew his gaze instinctively, even when there was nothing there. His thoughts, once coherent and grounded, now flickered, jumping between memories and fragments of visions he could not place. He reached a small clearing where the sun broke through fully. At first glance, it looked ordinary, almost welcoming. Then he saw the remnants. Footprints that weren't his, small depressions in the moss, faint scratches on the bark of the trees. Symbols. Carvings. Faint, deliberate patterns that seemed to shift subtly whenever he looked away and back. The forest was alive in ways he could now sense, even outside the thickest fog. He knelt by a small stream, cupped water in his hands, and drank. The cold water tasted metallic, almost like iron. He gagged but forced himself to swallow. It was nourishment, yes, but also a reminder of what the forest had taken, and perhaps left behind, inside him. Every sip felt like a tether, binding him to the place he had survived, but not escaped. First contact with survivors. Hours or days he couldn't tell later. Marcus stumbled across a ranger's cabin on the outskirts of the forest. Smoke rose faintly from a chimney. Relief surged, but it was tempered by unease. The cabin seemed too still, too quiet, as if it were holding its breath. He approached cautiously. Inside, a single ranger sat at a desk, hunched over paperwork. The man looked up, startled, then froze. His eyes widened. Recognition mingled with fear. You came back," the ranger whispered, voice trembling. "I survived," Marcus replied, voice strange, broken. The ranger's hands shook as he gestured for Marcus to sit. Slowly, cautiously, he spoke. "Not many do, not the same. Did you see, hear, feel it?" Marcus nodded. He could feel it in his bones, the forest's residue still clinging to him like a second skin. "Yes," he said. "It changes you." The ranger exhaled sharply. Outside the window, the trees of the forest loomed quietly, their shadows long even in the light. Signs of lingering horror. Days passed. Marcus returned to civilization, but the world outside the forest no longer felt solid. People moved like echoes, conversations felt hollow, and even familiar surroundings seemed off. Friends and family noticed subtle changes. The way he spoke, his eyes, the occasional twitch in his hands, the strange patterns he traced absent-mindedly on tables and walls. He tried to tell his story, but the words failed him. Descriptions of the forest, the shadows, the whispers, the entity. They seemed unreal, even to himself. Each attempt to explain ended in frustration, or worse, disbelief. People laughed nervously, dismissed him as shaken, stressed, or exaggerating. At night, he dreamed of the forest. Mist curling around trees, symbols glowing faintly, shadows moving impossibly. Whispers called his name. He woke drenched in sweat, heart pounding, the echo of voices lingering in his ears. And sometimes, just at the edge of perception, he felt a presence in his room, something waiting patiently, watching. Reflection and isolation. He avoided trails, parks, even forests within sight of town. Nature had become a reminder, not a refuge. Every rustle of leaves, every shadow in the corner of his eye, triggered instinctual terror. He was alone in the crowd, alone in thought, altered beyond explanation. Even writing or reading about nature, hiking, or survival triggered fragments of the forest. Subtle whispers, flickers of fog, shapes in the corner of his vision. He began to withdraw from the world, knowing that part of him remained tethered to that place. The forest had left a mark, and no distance could sever it. "I'm not the same," he admitted to himself, voice hollow, echoing. It was the truth. Not just the memories or the trauma, but something fundamental. Something in his mind, in his senses, had been rewritten. He could sense the forest still, like a shadow lingering at the edge of his perception. The awareness was a constant hum, subtle, patient, reminding him that survival had come at a cost. He had returned alive, but the forest had not released him entirely. The final scare. One evening, as Marcus sat alone in his apartment, the faint smell of pine drifted through the air. He froze, the metallic tang beneath it unmistakable. The mist of the forest seemed to curl in the corners of the room. A whisper reached his ear, soft but deliberate. "You belong here too." He spun around. Nothing moved. The apartment was silent, ordinary. Yet the feeling was unmistakable. The forest was not just a place. It was a presence, patient and intelligent. Somewhere in its depths, or perhaps now, somewhere within him, it waited. Marcus understood, with the cold clarity of despair, that he would never be free. Not truly. Not ever. The forest had followed him, just as it followed all who entered. He had returned, yes, but altered, hollowed, marked. And the whispers would never stop. Outside, shadows lengthened. The wind moved strangely. Somewhere, unseen, patient and eternal, the forest remembered.